They sawed off her head and then they stuffed it inside of an oversized Hello Kitty doll. And they would have gotten away for it too if it wasn't for the 14-year-old girl they had been grooming had not gone to the police station to state that she had been haunted by a ghost. This is a story of the Hello Kitty murder. Welcome to another episode of Patterns of Behavior, where we focus on the people behind the crime. I'm Ed Choi, and today we're going to be talking about the Hello Kitty murder. Today's story takes place in Hong Kong, but it actually begins in the Shenzhen region of China, when in 1976, Fan Man-yee was born to a family who ended up abandoning her, which led to her being raised in an all-girls orphanage up until 15 years old when she reached the age limit for the orphanage. So let's think about it for a second. She's 15 years old. She's barely a teenager and definitely nowhere near being an adult. She doesn't have the life experiences to be able to make the right choices that she needs to do to be able to get to the places that she needs to be. At 15 years old, the majority of us are completely clueless. We don't know who we are yet, let alone who we want to be. And at 15 years old, Man-yee was thrown out into the streets to fend for herself. Now she was living on the streets, homeless. And without that family support that a 15-year-old needs to be able to guide them to make the right decisions, she found herself replacing her family with drugs and was quickly starting to get addicted to those substances. And being on the streets without a permanent address, Man-yee found it impossible to get a legitimate position that also was able to fund her addiction. So she quickly turned towards street sex work in order to be able to fund her life. And after a few years of working the streets, at the age of 21, Man-yee joined a brothel. And after fending for herself for about 5 to 6 years living on the streets doing sex work, roughly around the same time that Man-yee joined the brothel, she actually ended up marrying one of her regular clients, a man by the name of Ing Ji-wen. But unfortunately for Man-yee, it wasn't happily ever after she got married, because her husband Ji-wen was not only also a drug addict, but he was very abusive. In fact, their neighbors that lived around them in the apartment complex often complained about having to wake up in the middle of the night to loud noises because they were fighting. And about a little over a year and a half after they got married, Man-yee ended up getting pregnant. And in November of 1998, Man-yee had a son. And now, in addition to the neighbors complaining about Man-yee and her husband fighting all hours of the night, they were also now complaining about a baby who was keeping them up at night crying because his parents were arguing. During her pregnancy, and especially after she gave birth to her son, Man-yee started to realize that she wanted to be able to provide a better and safer life for her son, a life where her son wouldn't have to witness his mother and father screaming at the top of their lungs for the rest of his life. So Man-yee took her baby son, left her husband, quit drugs, quit the sex work industry, and even got a legitimate job as a hostess at a karaoke bar, which meant that even though she now had a legitimate job and wasn't doing illegal work, because of how ludicrous the sex work industry can be, she was unfortunately making a significantly lesser wage, which meant that she was on a tighter budget working as a hostess. Now, it's not known if Man-yee completely quit the sex work industry, because around the same time, she also met someone by the name of Chan Man-lak, who was a 34-year-old socialite and a triad member who had been getting in trouble since he was in middle school. He was a drug dealer with drug convictions, and he was one of Man-yee's regular clients, and Man-yee quickly became a part of Man-lak's inner circle. Now, in early 1999, just months after she left her husband, assumingly because she had a lower income from her hostess gig, she saw an opportunity one of the times when she was hanging out with Man-lak, when she had the opportunity to steal his wallet. So she immediately grabs it and finds out that he had 4,000 Hong Kong dollars, which is roughly about $500 USD. And when Man-lak found out that Man-yee was the one who stole his wallet with the $4,000 inside, he made her pay it back and demanded that she also give him $10,000 4,000 Hong Kong dollars on top of it, which equals out to be about $1,250 USD. And Man-yee was able to pay back the 4,000 Hong Kong dollars that she had stolen right away. But because she was now working as a hostess with significantly reduced wages, she was going to need extra time to be able to save up $10,000 to pay back Man-lok. A little over a month and a half after Man-yee steals Man-lok's wallet, Man-lok decides that he's fed up with waiting. And on March 17, 1999, 34-year-old Chan Man-lok, along with his two male henchmen, both who are in their 20s and worked at a clothing store nearby, along with a 14-year-old girl that they had been grooming named Lau Ming-feng, went to Man-yee's apartment and abducted her. And the four of them took Man-yee back to an apartment located on number 31 Granville Road that was rented by Man-lok. And that apartment, which also would become her prison for the next month, was the last place that Man-yee would see before she lost her life. Now, Man-lok's original idea was that he was going to pimp out Man-yee so that she could make back the money that she had stolen and now owed to Man-lok. But shortly after bringing Man-yee to that apartment, Man-lok decided that he really wanted to take out his anger on Man-yee. And that anger manifested in the form of Man-yee getting beaten with metal bars and oftentimes getting strung up with electrical wire and being used as a punching bag. Her legs were oftentimes burned with candles and melted plastic so that she wouldn't even be able to walk. One of the times when she fell to the ground, she was kicked in the head upwards of 50 times. That's 50 times. And if that wasn't already bad, she would often have spices and chili oil rubbed into her wounds so that she would not be comfortable and in pain. And while she was in that state, the men would oftentimes urinate directly into her mouth. And at least one of the times, they also forced Man-yee to eat Lau Ming-feng's excrement.
Ugh, can't imagine what was going through her head. And I'm actually surprised she even lasted so long.
Yeah, I mean, even though she didn't make it, it was very obvious that she was a very strong woman. I would assume that as a new mother, that she was probably trying to stay alive for her son, hoping that one day she would be able to make it through and be able to be reunited with her son. But yeah, the physical pain that she went through, I can't even imagine the amount of trauma that she was in. Because even as she was getting beat, her abusers would beat her even more if she didn't smile and make it look like she was asking for the beatings. And no matter how strong one person may be, no matter how much that they're holding on to hope, looking for a light at the end of the tunnel because they have to survive for someone that they have to take care of and raise, unfortunately, just about a month after she was abducted, around April 14th to the night that turned into April 15th, Fan Man-yee lost her life. And when Man-lok and his two henchmen found Man-yee's body in the apartment after she had lost her life, they started to panic because I'm assuming that their intent wasn't to kill her because originally, remember, they wanted to be able to pimp out her body. They just wanted to have a little bit of fun taking out their anger and aggression out on her first. And as is the case with anyone who now has a dead body in their possession, Man-lok and his henchmen now had to figure out what to do with Man-yee's body. And the first thing they did was take Man-yee's body into the bathtub inside of the apartment. They took a saw and began to dismember her, chopping her up into smaller pieces. And obviously, dismembering a body completely to be able to dispose of them isn't a quick task. And science states that within about 24 to 48 hours after a body is deceased, it begins to smell. Now, this part gets a little bit more gruesome than the rest of it already. So just a fair warning, but these three decide that in order to be able to circumvent the smelling, they're going to cook these body parts. So they take Man-yee's body parts and they begin to boil it on the stove inside of the apartment while they're actually preparing food for themselves to eat. In fact, when it came time for them to boil the head, and this witness stated that the utensil that they used to stir Man-yee's head would then immediately be used to stir the noodles that they were cooking to eat, which that behavior alone tells me that we are not dealing with the brightest of criminals. And after boiling the body parts, they began disposing of them one by one, dividing them up and throwing them into trash bags filled with their everyday trash, except for the head. And for whatever reason, after boiling the head, they decided to sew it inside of an oversized Hello Kitty stuffed animal along with a bunch of dead insects. And along with the head, the only other parts of the body that were not disposed of in the trash were some of the organs that were left in a plastic bag inside of the refrigerator. But the rest of the other body parts that were thrown out along with the trash ended up in 3 different landfills. And even though they might not have been the brightest of criminals, they would have gotten away with it too, because the plan didn't not make sense. Disposing of a body along with the rest of the trash by making it look like it's cooked food that has just gone bad isn't a horrible idea in disposing of a body. However, they ended up getting caught because of the 14-year-old girl that they had been grooming, Lau Ming-feng. Because on May 24th, 1999, Ming-feng went to her local police station and told them that for the last several weeks, she was being haunted by the ghost of a woman who was bound with electrical wire and had been tortured to death. Now, imagine in China where there's already very few murders that happen already, and imagine this 14-year-old girl comes in as a police officer, an adult police officer. This teenager tells you that she's being haunted by this ghost. The majority of us, just like those police officers did, essentially laughed her off as a hysterical teenager. But the mood of the police officers turned from laughing at Ming-feng as a hysterical teenager to all of a sudden taking her seriously because she stated that it was a woman that she had a hand in murdering. So after pleading with the police officers who were treating her like a hysterical teenager, after a while, the police officers were like, you know what? We're not really doing too much anyway. So a couple of them followed Ming-feng back to the not so great part of town, to that apartment that's located on Granville Road, and followed her up to the apartment, where they then found that oversized Hello Kitty stuffed animal with Man-yee's head inside. And Man-lok was living in another apartment in a nicer part of the city with his wife and his newborn child. And that apartment was raided on May 28th, 1999. And the police actually originally thought that Man-lok's wife was involved in the murder of Man-yee, but unfortunately they were not able to find any evidence to corroborate her involvement. When news broke in the media about Man-yee's murder, one of Man-lok's 2 henchmen decided that he was going to flee to mainland China, and it even landed him on the Interpol's most wanted list. And it wasn't until February 14th, 2000, when he was arrested for irregularities on his passport, that he was then extradited back to Hong Kong a couple days later on February 17th. Which means that for almost a year, about 9 months, this one henchman probably thought that he got away with the crime. And I don't know if it played out this way, but the way that I'm imagining it is this henchman was starting to feel more comfortable in his day-to-day, starting to look over his shoulder a little bit less as the days go on, because it's been 9 months since he fled to mainland China, just for him to get arrested and then be held accountable for the crime of murder. And on October 20th in the year 2000, a 6-week trial commences that ends in December 7th, and these 3 men argue that Man-yee died of an overdose of methamphetamine that they claim that she self-administered. And not only was Man-lok's wife not involved in the crime, she actually testified against him. 14-year-old Lau Ming-feng also testified against the 3 men, and she was the reason why all the details that should have been lost because they had chopped up and boiled Man-yee's body was known to the police and the prosecution. But unfortunately, because no one else was in the apartment when Man-yee actually passed away, the jury, even with all of those witnesses and the witness statement from Ming-feng, they were unable to find the men guilty of murder. And unfortunately, because no one else was in the apartment when Man-yee passed away, especially the main witness, Ming-feng, she was not able to provide a witness statement on what exactly happened when Man-yee passed away, which meant that the only evidence the prosecution were able to use in the death of Man-yee were her actual bones. And unfortunately, the jury decided that the bones were not sufficient evidence to rule that Man-yee was murdered, or that she died from a self-administered drug overdose like the 3 defendants were claiming. Man-lok and one of his henchmen denied killing Man-yee. However, they did not deny that they took part in dismembering her body. which meant that the jury were unable to rule that the men intended to kill Man-yee. However, they were able to rule that Man-yee did die directly due to their abuse. Justice Peter Nguyen, who presided over the trial, stated, and I quote, "Never throughout the years in Hong Kong has a court heard such cruelty, depravity, callousness, brutality, violence, and viciousness perpetrated by a human being or human beings on another human being." Being just 14 years old, who was not in control of her own decisions, Lau Ming-feng was not prosecuted, especially because she had worked out a deal with the prosecution for being their key witness. As for the three adult men who were in charge of this heinous act, all three men, Menlak and his two henchmen, were all convicted of manslaughter and were sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 20 years. After hearing the sentencing, one of the henchmen's brother broke the courtroom's door on the way out, slamming the door shut, and his sister had a mental breakdown. A little over 3 years after the end of the trial, Man-yee's skull was cremated and returned to her biological family on March 26, 2004. The apartment building where all of this took place, that was located on number 31 Granville Road, was demolished in September of 2012 and was rebuilt to become a hotel, where they now have 3 Buddha portraits placed as a memorial for Man-yee. The necklace that Man-yee was wearing when she was abducted was left behind in the refrigerator in that apartment and was eventually given to her son. In March of 2004, one of the henchmen was able to get his life sentence reduced down to an 18-year sentence, at which point he was released in April 2014, and just 8 years later, in August 2022, he was rearrested again and sentenced to a year in prison for essaying a 10-year-old girl. Manlock lost his appeal on his sentence in August 2007. He and the other henchmen are still serving their time at Stanley Prison. And to be honest, it's extremely terrifying that a man in his 40s was able to essay a 10-year-old child and only get convicted for 1 year behind bars, which means that if he was released in August of 2023, he's currently a free man. Other than the really gruesome details of this case, the thing that really throws me for a loop is the fact that these people, these 3 men, were able to so nonchalantly cook and eat food while they were smelling a human's body cooking in the same room. And then to think that this 14-year-old girl that they were grooming and forcing to do heinous acts on Man-yee as well was not going to get traumatized to the point that she was going to have to go tell the police. And the thing about it too is that no one knows that Ming-feng went to the police to tell them this crazy tale because she didn't know how else to do it, or because she was so traumatized from being forced to be there and from being forced to partake in the abuse, because the 3 men made her abuse Man-yee as well. If her brain protected her and created this haunting illusion to try to protect her in some way, but also to put anyone through such horrible torture over essentially $500, or even with the additional fee for less than $2,000, to put them through such torture for over a month, take them away from their newborn child as a single mother, and do this to them, even outside of the fact that they were not able to prove that they directly murdered her. These 3 men should never be able to see the light of day ever again. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me on another episode of Patterns of Behavior, where we focus on the people behind the crime. And if you would like to help keep this podcast sustainable, think about joining our Patreon. Also, for those of you who are listening to this podcast, remember there is a video version on Spotify and YouTube as well. Otherwise, you can find me at Etch-a-Sketch with a J on all social media platforms. And with that, thank you, and I will see you on the next one.